Scattered across the 13 time zones of the Soviet Union, unimaginable numbers of innocent men and women suffered and perished in camps like this. Millions of anonymous victims were engulfed in Stalin's last years by the network of state prisons, the Gulag. Through fear of the Gulag, Stalin and his successors were able to impose a system of total control on the lives of their citizens.
Oh, people died of starvation, hard labor. It was hard labor. Of course, people died. And to make sure you were dead, they would get a big crowbar as you were going out, as they were taking your body out and stamping it right in you to make sure no one was escaping. They didn't even leave the dead alone.
This same Stalin was an idol for hosts of Russians, the naive and the sophisticated.
Stalin was like God for us. When he died, it was such a terrible experience. We had a kind of memorial meeting in high school where I was, and a boy next to me started to smile, and I was ready to kill him.
Сталинизм – это ведь одна из форм бесчеловечности. Их много. Есть и гитлеризм, итальянский фашизм, или маоизм, или полпотизм. Это все разные формы бесчеловечности. Я испытал сталинизм на своей шкуре и был его соучастником. Соучастником и жертвой, так сказать, все вместе.
Stalin's supporters frequently became his victims. From 1934 on, the dictator ruthlessly eliminated all opposition, real and imaginary. The purges had destroyed millions, including the Red Army commander, Marshal Tukhachevsky. 2 marshals and the flower of the army were butchered with him. The Soviet Union was weakened when it faced a twofold threat from Japan and Nazi Germany. Hitler was a fanatical anti-communist. He had already moved east and was planning to seize Poland. But if he did so, England and France would at last declare war on Germany. In the summer of 1939, an Anglo-French mission came by slow boat to Moscow to persuade Stalin to line up with England and France. They were given an ambivalent welcome. Stalin did not trust the English and French to honor their pledge to Poland. He now saw pickings for himself there. Taking advantage of the situation, Hitler sent his foreign secretary, Ribbentrop, to Moscow on the 23rd of August. That very night, to the amazement of the world, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression treaty, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Stalin was being offered, on the one hand, by Hitler, what he hoped meant peace, which he needed very badly to pull the Soviet Union together, plus very considerable territorial gains. We were offering him frontline position in the nastiest war that ever been. That didn't appeal to him at all.
There were secret protocols to the pact, which gave Stalin a free hand in the east. Over the next 18 months, the Russians reclaimed part of eastern Poland, they invaded Finland, absorbed Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, stating that this was the wish of the Baltic peoples, and they grasped part of Romania, now Soviet Moldavia. German and Soviet officers fraternizing in Poland. The German invasion on the 1st of September 1939 had led to Britain and France declaring war on Hitler. Less than 3 weeks later, Soviet forces had also invaded Poland. Stalin's crony, Marshal Voroshilov, was defense minister, in charge of the weakened Red Army. He was here put up to justify the new treaty with Hitler. Only months before, he had helped Stalin to liquidate thousands of senior officers and generals for allegedly collaborating with fascist Germany. Stalin had fresh victims now. Over the next 2 years, all opponents of annexation were shot or dispatched in their hundreds of thousands to the Gulag. Stalin believed that a long war in the West would allow him to consolidate his gains. He was wrong.
Stalin made one fatal miscalculation. He calculated that the French armed forces were sufficiently strong that France would be able to hold out for a number of years, and that it would be a long replay of the First World War in the Western Europe, while Russia would remain neutral outside of it and saving its strength so that it could enter at a time of Stalin's choosing and go even further west. This was Stalin's game plan.
Even the collapse of France left Stalin unruffled. A peace treaty signed with Japan in 1941 and approved by Hitler made him feel more secure. "We are both Asiatics," he said. May Day, 1941, 20 months into World War II. Stalin's thoughts were elsewhere as Marshal Timoshenko addressed the traditional parade. Reports from spies and from Winston Churchill now told Stalin the Nazis were poised to invade Russia. But wasn't Churchill a lifelong enemy of communists? Stalin paced up and down. He suspected a conspiracy.
We had thousands of data that Hitler's army was preparing for aggression. He didn't believe this. He thought it was a provocation, particularly from Britain, that all these people who were reporting, they were agents of Britain, provocators, and so on and so on. And some of them were arrested even.
Germany attacked Russia on the 22nd of June, 1941. There was no ultimatum, nor any declaration of war. Within hours, more than 1,000 aircraft were destroyed, most on the ground, and the Nazi troops were 100 miles inside Russia's new borders. Foreign Secretary Molotov broadcast to a stunned nation. For 10 days, the Soviet people heard nothing from Stalin. Where was he?
No, he was not missing. He was in his country residence. He was, however, shocked and depressed because he didn't believe that Germans would do that. That he didn't believe that they would violate the agreement, which he believed was a means to forestall somehow the war and postpone it at least. And he was visited by one of my aunts during these days, and she found him actually saying that things are very bad. Things are very bad. You have to leave Moscow, you have to take your children, your family, and go to Urals.
The Germans advanced rapidly on 3 main fronts, through Minsk and Smolensk, due east on to Moscow. In the north, Nazi forces overwhelmed the Baltic states and soon threatened Leningrad. But the greatest disaster was the fall of Kiev, with the loss of 500,000 Russian prisoners. The total demoralization of the Ukraine was obvious.
Народ повірив, і дуже вірив, і Сталіну, і всій партії. Дуже вірив народ. На війну одразилась друга сторона. Пропаганда про те, що війна буде моторів, війна буде техніки, і у 2 неділі війна закінчиться. Оце нанесло великий дуже вред нашій армії, що армія відступала. Паніка пішла. І були такі, я не участвував в цих, але бачив, всі є живі зараз свідетелі, що були полки цілі, ходили, отут по Україні. Ходили, не знали, куди йти, що робити, і шукали німця, щоб здатися в плен.
In July 1941, Stalin's own son, Yakov, was taken prisoner. Stalin refused to exchange him for a German general. He died in captivity. In September, catastrophe also befell Leningrad. German bombs fell on the warehouses containing the city's food supplies. Many Leningraders still blame Stalin and his appointees for the famine that followed. Gennady Byeglov lost all his family.
Даже если это так, что именно все продукты Ленинграда были сосредоточены в одном месте под открытым небом, это уже преступление. Любой лейтенант, любой старшина, я не знаю, там, поймет, что это делать нельзя, это просто преступление. Почему нельзя было за месяц, как только немец быстро подходил к Ленинграду, раздать эти продукты? Ну, просто раздать им. Уже бы много сотни тысяч людей сохранили бы свои жизни, да и все.
In charge of the beleaguered Leningrad was Andrei Zhdanov, one of Stalin's close circle. Leningraders claim that he ate abundantly as his fellow citizens starved. The city's agony lasted 900 days. More than 600,000 perished, mostly from hunger, more than the total British and Empire war did. A survivor, the writer Israel Mehta.
Я был вшивый, я был грязный, я был покрыт фурункулами от недоедания, от голода. Когда я выехал из Ленинграда, то когда первый раз меня повели мыть, у меня и сил-то особенных не было, ноги были опухшие, то мне фуфайку под душем отдирали, потому что она была представшая фурункулом. Мы все были вшивые. Это очень странная вещь, почему вши сопутствуют голоду. Это я даже не могу понять, почему это. Пожалуй, еще сильнее, чем голод, темнота. А когда вы в полной темноте, голодные, в холодной квартире, где нету воды, и вы ничего не можете делать, вот это ужас.
Even in Leningrad during the height of the siege, the secret police spied on the people. A wrong word meant prison.
На фронте и в тылу нельзя было даже заикнуться о военной технике врага. Немедленно давали статью восхваления иностранной техники. Клевета на советскую армию. Паникерство.
Moscow in October 1941. Defenses were still being hastily improvised as the Germans reached the outskirts of the city. Departments of the Soviet government were evacuated 500 miles east to the Volga. Stalin also considered quitting Moscow, but at the last moment decided to stay. On November the 7th, he appeared at the traditional parade commemorating the Bolshevik Revolution. He hurled defiance at the Germans, invoking age-old Russian patriotism.
Смерть немецким оккупантам! Да здравствует наша славная Родина, ее свобода, ее независимость. Под знаменем Ленина вперед, победа!
The knowledge that Stalin had not deserted Moscow steeled millions of Russians. It still heartens admirers like Ivan Shekhovtsov.
Трудно сейчас передать радость, которую испытывал народ, узнав, что Сталин в Москве. Значит, это сразу вывод: победа за нами. Москву не дадут, значит, раз там Сталин. Вот что значит его одно имя значило тогда.
The troops marching out to battle that day did not know that only weeks earlier Stalin had inquired through intermediaries whether Hitler would agree to peace in return for the Ukraine and other Soviet territories. Only now can Soviet historians discuss this.
Такой зондаж был сделан, но Гитлер был уверен, что вопрос занятия Москвы и победоносного завершения войны против Советского Союза — это уже вопрос немногих дней. и отказался вести переговоры на эту тему. Образ Сталина как непреклонного главнокомандующего, вот, этот образ меркнет, когда мы узнаем вот такие факты.
Marshal Zhukov masterminded the defense of Moscow. He was one of the few commanders prepared to argue with Stalin about strategy. An extra 100,000 men trained to fight in sub-zero temperatures helped secure Stalin's first victory over the Germans. He learned from experience, but never took the blame for failure.
У Сталина была задача только согласиться, как третейскому судье, или не согласиться. Если он соглашался с проведением какой-то операции, она проваливалась, конечно, виноват был командующий фронтом и те, кто проводили. Но если эта операция увенчалась успехом, то, конечно, он был здесь на коне. У него очень была удобная позиция.
As the Russians recaptured towns, so they unearthed evidence of Nazi atrocities. Every German outrage made the Soviet people more determined to win, and ironically strengthened Stalin's power over them. Others paid their respects. In August 1942, Winston Churchill came to Moscow, accompanied by the American diplomat Averell Harriman.
Whatever our sufferings, whatever our toils, we will continue hand in hand like comrades and brothers until every vestige of the Nazi regime has been beaten into the ground.
Now the US was in the war, Stalin wanted Allied troops to invade Europe. Churchill promised an invasion of North Africa. Despite the forced smiles, Stalin insisted that only a second front would beat the Germans into the ground. Allied supplies came hazardously by sea. They were never more than 5% of Russia's war effort. Early in the war, Stalin had arranged to freight industrial plant and equipment to the safety of the Urals. All available resources were now mobilized. In contrast to the Germans, Soviet women played a vital role in producing armaments. The Gulag, a whole state in itself, was also contributing on a large scale.
Все стратегические дороги строили заключенные, мы строили. Мне пришлось аэродромы строить под Красноводском в 1941 году. Мне довелось строить железную дорогу в 1942 году Саратов-Сталинград.
Stalingrad saw the decisive battle of World War II. Named after Stalin for his alleged Civil War exploits there, the city nearly fell to the Germans in the winter of 1942. Stalingrad was the gateway to Russia's oil supplies. Thanks to the extraordinary heroism of the Red Army, at Stalingrad, the tide turned conclusively in Russia's favor.
By the time of the Battle of Stalingrad, the Soviets were able to put good tanks and good aircraft, good artillery into the field in numbers that actually exceeded those available and produced by the Germans, and this despite the fact that the Germans had superior productive capacity and the whole of occupied Europe as well to help them. And this is indeed an achievement which one must say was rendered to some extent possible by the ultra-centralized nature of the planning system, which, whatever harm it does in peacetime, is rather effective in mobilizing resources for war.
Stalingrad was a disaster for Hitler and the Germans. The Nazi leader had insisted that his troops fight to the last drop of blood. But on February the 1st, 1943, the dispirited German remnants gave in, along with their commander, Field Marshal von Paulus, and the generals under him. It was a special humiliation. Never before in history had a German field marshal and his entire army, over 100,000 men, surrendered. This was an unparalleled victory for the Red Army and for Stalin. The road west lay open. was a successful year for the Red Army. The siege of Leningrad was broken after 900 days. Hitler was in retreat. The Soviet government moved back into Kiev. Stalin's success continued. In the summer of 1944, Red Army detachments crossed into Poland. Within days, they pushed the Germans back as far as Warsaw. On the 1st of August, the Germans occupying Warsaw were confronted by an uprising of Polish resistance fighters. The fighting lasted 2 months. The Red Army stayed put and gave no effective help to the insurgents. Stalin did not want independent-minded Polish nationalists assuming control in Poland. The uprising was crushed, and in revenge, the city was destroyed. Britain had gone to war to save Poland. But when Churchill revisited Russia in late 1944, he suspected that Poland's future lay in Stalin's hands. It was the Red Army which had become the arbiter of Eastern Europe.
The Russian armies, the armies of the Soviet Union, have struck enormous blows. They have broken the spirit and the structure of the German army.
The scale of Soviet victories meant that the Allies would have to accommodate Stalin's wishes. Stalin saw Churchill off, an honor never conferred on any previous visiting statesman. He could afford to be generous. Soviet troops were forging a new empire.
Красная армия достойно выполнила свой патриотический долг и освободила нашу отчизну от врага. Отныне и навсегда наша земля свободна от гитлеровской нечисти.
During the latter half of 1944, victorious Red Armies liberated most of Eastern Europe and brought back exiled communist leaders with them. Stalin met Churchill and President Roosevelt at Yalta in February 1945 to discuss the post-war settlement.
The kind of documents drawn up at Yalta were perfectly reasonable, with all the right views on parliamentary democracy, pluralism of parties, and all the rest of it. But that wasn't Stalin's interpretation. States had to be under his domination. At the beginning, of course, there weren't very many communists in Eastern Europe, so he had to operate with very small communist parties. I mean, the only place there was a really strong local communist party was Yugoslavia.
The Yugoslav communist partisans liberated their own country. Tito and his colleague Milovan Djilas were bluntly told that Stalin meant to leave his mark on the new Europe permanently.
Stalin je rekao da posleratna Evropa neće izgledati kao iza Prvog svjetskog rata. Da će onaj ko zauzme određenu teritoriju, toj teritoriji i nametnuti svoj sistem.
Stalin insisted that the Red Army reach Berlin before the Allies. The final assault on the city was launched on the 16th of April, 1945. Russian fatalities exceeded 100,000. To the end, Stalin remained profligate with human lives. The total number of Soviet war losses is still being calculated.
Я думаю, что общие потери в армии, погибшими, умершими, ранеными, угнанными, пропавшими без вести, мирного населения порядка 26-28 миллионов человек. Я думаю, что наступит время, когда более точно скажем. Но вот с теми специалистами, с которыми я занимаюсь, мы пришли к мнению, что потеряли 26-20-28.
Devastation in Russia was also on a scale hard to conceive. Communications shattered. The fabric of cities rent asunder. 20 million people left homeless. In the ruins of Potsdam, near Berlin, the Big Three met for the last time. Stalin was determined to strengthen Soviet security. The new American president, Truman, and Churchill were powerless to forestall a new order in Eastern Europe, predominantly communist, increasingly Stalinist. Military and diplomatic successes gave a further boost to the Stalin cult back home.
All operations that were successful, they were called Stalin's strikes, Stalin's operations. And he was absolutely sure about his military talent, military successful strategy. He was authority in the military field as in any others, even in any other science, no matter what kind of a science, technical, humanitarian, it didn't matter. He was the great generalissimus, but people always talked about the Zhukov's role. So actually he was jealous to Zhukov.
In the summer of 1945, Soviet athletes and gymnasts mounted a parade for the greater glory of Stalin. Present were Marshal Zhukov and General Eisenhower, American commander in Europe. Stalin did not like to see his own generals on close terms with their Western counterparts. His suspicions led him to remove Zhukov from the city. Western influence was now suspect.
Millions of troops, millions of people have actually been in the West by the end of the war. And I think that this also worried Stalin, because before the war he somehow succeeded in persuading Soviet people that we live better than anybody else in the world. And now they saw that other people maybe live better than we do. And they could have undesirable ideas which Stalin certainly wanted to crush.
The chief of secret police was Stalin's fellow Georgian, Lavrenti Beria, whose empire of state prisons and camps, the Gulag, was now steadily growing. Soon to be swept into the Gulag were hundreds of thousands of Russian prisoners of war, like these, liberated by Americans in Germany. Stalin would not sign the Geneva Convention, so only 1 in 5 Soviet prisoners survived the war. The rest starved into extinction. Some Russians had fought on the German side through hunger or conviction. They tried mutilation or suicide to avoid return. But people could be jailed for the slightest offense. Yev Kopyalev was arrested in 1945. He was then a keen supporter of Stalin.
Ну вот меня же так арестовали за клевету на армию, на клевету на командование. Потому что преступлений можно найти было сколько угодно. Клевета на вождя, клевета на советскую литературу. Вот у Солженицына в числе пунктов была клевета на советскую литературу.
The great Stalin, the people's first candidate. Stalin was nominated unanimously by Moscow workers during the 1946 elections. From this factory, Stalin announced the first post-war 5-year plan. The emphasis was again, as in the 1930s, to be on heavy industry rather than food and consumer goods. Stalin wanted to keep his armed forces strong. He felt threatened by the West.
I think we have to see Stalin as fundamentally a cold warrior in his very essence, a ruler with a deep need for enemies. And the logical candidates for enemyhood were the leaders of the Western powers who, in one way or another, were seeking to obstruct what Stalin was doing in the aftermath of the Second World War, namely imposing a Stalinist order upon the East European countries that were occupied by the Red Army.
It is my duty to place before
In March 1946, Winston Churchill made a speech in the United States at Fulton, Missouri.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague.
Within 4 years of this speech, most East European countries came under communist control. Their secret services, armed forces, their economies controlled by Stalin from Moscow. No Tsar in Russian history had ever ruled such a vast empire.
Our model, administrative and economic model, was actually imposed upon them. I think this was also a mistake by Stalin. He should have friendly governments and friendly states along our western borders, but as far as their internal development, he should give them more freedom to develop economically and politically, and I think that this would then create a better atmosphere.
Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia was the only East European leader Stalin did not control. He visited Czechoslovakia in the year its freedom vanished. Stalin's attitude to small nations was cynical.
Stalin je odmah počeo oko Albanije da govori i kaže mi se slažemo da vi progutate Albaniju, napravio pokret, jeli. Ja sam na to rekao ne radi se o gutanju, nego o ujedinjenju, jer mi smo tada pregovarali s Albanijom o ujedinjenju Albanije i Jugoslavije. Na što je Molotov dobacio, pa to i jeste gutanje.
Stalin was unable to swallow Berlin. He established a road and rail blockade of the city's western sector in 1948 to pressure the British, French and Americans into dropping the merger of their 3 zones in a West German state. Because the West Berliners were constantly supplied by air, Stalin was eventually forced to climb down. East and West built grievances into Cold War.
As President Reagan liked to say many years later, it takes 2 to tango. And I think when we look back on the diplomacy and politics of the early Cold War period, both sides, Soviet and American, were tangoing. Who tangoed the faster or the more, I don't believe I'd care to say. But it took partners to create the Cold War. Otherwise, it would have been like one hand clapping.
Show trials in Eastern Europe reinforced Western fears of Stalin's policies. This one took place in Bulgaria in 1949. Similar trials were held in Hungary and Czechoslovakia during the next 2 years. The defendants were frequently tortured into confession, then liquidated. Stalin's own circle was depleted by death. Andrei Zhdanov, Commissar for Culture, had been the scourge of writers and composers. His already weak heart may have failed from constant attendance at Stalin's drinking bouts. New fears now swept the country. Within a year, Stalin purged most of the Leningrad party, including Politburo member Voznesensky, a talented economist. He was shot. Even Molotov, Stalin's closest associate, was not safe. His wife, Paulina, was shortly to be arrested and sent into exile. Stalin's own relatives were not spared. He imprisoned 2 sisters-in-law.
We were not supposed to question things. Even for my own aunts, I asked what is their crime, and he said that they knew a lot, and they talked about it a lot, and that is serving our enemies. These were the latest years of his life, dark times for the whole country and for the party and for himself, I should say.
The Soviet Union was now isolated, as correspondent Harrison Salisbury discovered on his return to Russia in 1949 after a 5-year absence.
As I walked down the streets, not infrequently I would meet someone whom I had met during the war. At first, I tried to speak to them, but they would look right through me and go straight ahead without speaking. I quickly understood it was too dangerous to talk to me. And for any Russian to have a contact with me was equivalent, almost certainly, to arrests and possibly a one-way ticket to Siberia.
By now, Stalin was seeing enemies everywhere.
Когда наследователь МГБ и подследственный, который ему говорит, я, говорит, еще подследственный, говорит, я не обвиняемый еще, я подозреваемый. А следователи ему говорят: нет, раз вы здесь сидите, вы уже обвиняемый. А вот там, за окном, вот люди ходят, они все подозреваемые.
Jewish intellectuals, like the famous actor-director Solomon Michaels, were particularly suspect. They might be Zionists and owe allegiance to the new state of Israel rather than to Stalin. The dictator wanted to dispose of Michaels. Stalin's daughter was an involuntary witness to the plot.
I just walked into the room and overheard the talk when he was telling somebody, talking and saying, well, it must be an automobile accident in which Michaels was killed. And then next day or so, the story came that his car was stopped, that he was taken out of the car and murdered and violently killed by some hired people. And bringing these two talks together was a pretty horrifying thing to me, because I realized that he talked about that, because the name was mentioned, and his suggestion was automobile accident. And then it was reported in the papers that it was automobile accident.
A few brave individuals did oppose Stalin. The poet Anatoly Zhigulin and his teenage friends in Voronezh formed a party to combat Stalin after the war. There were at least 30 such groups.
Прежде всего, нас толкнуло на создание антисталинской организации резкий диссонанс, контраст между реальной жизнью, в которой мы жили, а это были страшные послевоенные годы, 46-47 год, это был голод. Люди пухли, люди умирали от голода. А в это время сталинские газеты, сталинское радио, сталинские кинофильмы орали, кричали, печатали плакаты и так далее о счастливой жизни советских людей.
Soviet media routinely painted the rosiest possible picture of life in Russia. In his late years, Stalin himself may have come to believe his own propaganda. Glory to the great Stalin. The Stalin cult reached its height on his 70th birthday in 1949. The Bolshoi Theater was the venue for a special celebration. The communist victor in China's civil war, Mao Zedong, headed the guest list. It was during this period that Stalin was frequently called the greatest scientific genius of all times and nations.
We just believed that he was absolutely perfect individual, and he lived somewhere in Kremlin. His window was always lighting, and he was thinking about us, about each of us. That was how we felt. For example, somebody told me once that Stalin could be best surgeon. He could make a brain operation better than anybody else. And I believed it. I knew that he was busy with other things, but if he wanted, he was better.
Stalin's understanding of science was, in fact, primitive. He showered rewards on the charlatan biologist Lysenko, president of the Soviet Academy of Agricultural Sciences. Lysenko and his followers believed they could train wheat to grow in extreme cold. They denied the importance of heredity.
Genetics was considered the bourgeois decadent science, or the cybernetics, also bourgeois decadent, and that's why we are now so far behind in the computers and all the others, because it was science which was prohibited by Stalin. He didn't permit. He jailed the scientists who were making research, and that is certainly one of the reasons of our backwardness now, especially in technology.
Lysenko was so powerful that any scientist who dared criticize him faced arrest, torture, and imprisonment in the Gulag. Dissent would soon be reported to the security forces by any one of a whole army of secret informers employed in every place of work. camp inmates working on a construction site in the early 1950s. People punished for their beliefs usually went to the same prisons and camps as ordinary criminals, though their sentences and conditions were often harsher. This propaganda film shows none of the real horrors of Stalin's Gulag. Prisoners faced extreme conditions and extreme cruelty. Gennady Beglov spent 9 years in the camps in the 1950s.
Ночью пришел эшелон, это товарные вагоны, набитые битком, естественно, страшный мороз. Вот. Открывает вагоны, вагон высыпается прямо на снег. Ну, тут собаки, автоматчики, это все понятно. Открывает там какой-то 6-й вагон, и из этого вагона никто не выпрыгивает. Когда туда заглянули, то увидели страшную картину. Там все слиплись, все смерзлись. По 2, по 3, по 4 человека. Вот как они грели друг друга в последние секунды, свое тепло отдавали. И так вот они и остались в этом положении. Это глыбы льда.
Alice Mulcagian, an American of Armenian extraction, was sentenced to 5 years in a camp during a visit to Russia.
Females never tried to escape, but the males did. There was a time 4 of them escaped to China. They were successful, but I seen the ones that weren't successful. There were 2 men, and they made sure that everybody saw them. They had let the dogs on them, and the dogs literally tore them apart. And they said, this is what happens to people that try to escape. And it was, I mean, their body all shredded. It was something terrible.
Знаете, Энгельс когда-то говорил, что армия есть отражение государства. Так вот, лагеря наши, это были тоже отражением государства. Это не было просто государство в государстве. Они были отражением системы. То есть, они были жестоки, они были бесчеловечны, они были несправедливы, и они были страшно нерентабельны, непроизводительны.
This railway at Salichat was constructed by camp inmates in the 1940s and 50s, but was never completed. Like many grandiose Stalinist projects, it now lies abandoned.
9 часов вечера. На трибуне появляется товарищ Сталин и его ближайший...
At the 19th Party Congress in 1952, Stalin emerged from seclusion. He had not permitted such a gathering for 14 years. Now, armed with the Soviet atom bomb, and with world revolution apparently going his way, he could boast of success.
Представители братских партий, восхищаясь отвагой и успехами нашей партии, присвоили ей звание ударной бригады мирового революционного и рабочего движения.
Though he spoke of world revolution, Stalin's thoughts were nearer home. With advancing age, he was becoming ever more mistrustful. He now began to make startling accusations against some of his closest colleagues, suggesting they were British agents.
We do not have any concrete, explicit evidence that Stalin, as head of state and leader, was behaving in a way that we might clinically call irrational or mad. You might say the fact that he locked himself up to write a book on linguistics when the Soviet state was besieged by all sorts of problems was crazy. But it is consistent with the behavior of a despot in any system who has the great freedom of choosing to be interested in what he wants to be interested in. He now wanted, apparently, a new terror against the survivors of the old terror, Molotov, Kaganovich, and the others. But if it was crazy, it was the same Stalin of the 30s.
The first sign of the forthcoming purge was a newspaper report.
A very inconspicuous little item on the back page of Pravda, which was headed with the single word, Chronicle. Doesn't sound dangerous, but it was the most dangerous thing I ever read in the Soviet press. It was the announcement of a plot of Kremlin doctors to murder or make ill a whole group of top Soviet officials and generals, some of whom had died. The plot was directed, it was said, by espionage agents of joint, by which they meant the Zionist agency and the British and the Americans.
The satirical journal Crocodile weighed in against the accused doctors. Leading pathologist Yakov Rappaport was one of those arrested.
Люди сами изобретали свои преступления. Что вот я должен сам изобретать свои преступления. С этого началось. Но я наотрез отрицал все. Он стал писать протокол, я категорически это отрицал все.
Professor Rappaport was taken to Moscow's notorious Lefortovo prison for a medical examination.
Врач, молодая женщина, велела раздеться догола. Я сначала как-то было неудобно раздеваться догола. Ну, ладно. Осмотр, заглянула везде, там и сюда, и сюда, и сюда, и даже туда. И произнесла вслух: геморроя нет. Я говорю: а что, без геморроя не расстреливают?
A totally innocent Professor Rappaport was tortured by sleep deprivation for several weeks until, suddenly, the world changed. Stalin's paranoia had reached a peak. Even his own physician was locked up. Then, at the beginning of March 1953, Stalin failed to emerge from his room at the usual hour. Alexei Rybin was on guard.
Начали волноваться. Старостин, как старший, стал Лозгачева посылать к Сталину. А Лозгачев говорит: ты старший, говорит, по должности, ты и иди первым к Сталину. По правде сказать, они оба боялись без вызова заходить. Ну, представьте себе, вдруг заходит, допустим, Старостин. Ну, Сталин спросит: зачем вы? Я вас вызывал? Ну, и в дураках окажется.
Beria was responsible for Stalin's personal security. For hours, he could not be found. Stalin's survival would not be to his advantage.
Берия приехал пьяным и хрипящий, умирающий Сталин, он сказал: что вы подняли панику? Сталин крепко спит, товарищ Сталин крепко спит. Разогнал всех до утра и уехал.
The old man in his 70s was deprived of medical help for considerable time, more than 12 hours in any case, was deprived of making proper diagnosis and determination what to do next. That is what I call, you know, helping to die. He raised his left hand and showed up with the finger in a kind of a threatening way, and looked at us all with, not unconsciously, and it was rather severe and threatening look. And I thought he was threatening us all, and people who stood close also believed so, because they kind of suddenly stepped back.
The medical report stated that Stalin died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
To me, it has become quite clear that his death was somehow helped by the government. The motive is this struggle for power. Obviously, the Politburo got rid of first of him and then of Beria a couple of months later.
Even in the distant camps, there were those who wept.
Боялся, что будет хуже. Тогда еще думал, что он при всех своих недостатках и прочем, может быть, последний коммунист в Политбюро, который хочет действительно чего-то хорошего. И плакал даже по секрету. Вот сейчас стыдно сознаться.
After Stalin's death, power passed to the Politburo of the Communist Party. Beria was secretly tried and shot, ironically, as a British spy.
The historical phenomenon of Stalinism as a regime, as a system of mass terror, ended with Stalin's death. What lived on was the Stalinist system, the administrative system. Bureaucratic state control of society. An attempt by the state to manage, administer, and, quote, plan, though that was a bit of a joke, everything from poetry writing to pig raising to the production of pig iron. Stalin's legacy was that administrative system, plus one other important thing: fear in the hearts and souls of citizens.
Only when the fear vanished could the system change. And only then could the debate about Stalin's guilt and responsibility begin.
I don't call it Stalin and terror. I call it the terror of the Bolshevik Party of Lenin, the terror of one-party regime.
Уважение и авторитет к Сталину у моего поколения и меня в частности основывается на том, что он 30 лет стоял во главе первого в мире социалистического государства рабочих и крестьян, и что он, как сказал Черчилль, принял Россию с деревянной сахой и оставил ее оснащенную атомным оружием. Оставил ее Сталин, уходя из жизни, одного из двух мощных государств современного мира.
Сталин еще живет в нас, в самых разных формах, в психологии, в навыках. И до тех пор, пока сталинизм не будет уничтожен, не с помощью пули или гильотины, или петли, а с помощью перевоспитания людей, разумного перевоспитания, до тех пор нет гарантии существования человеческого рода.
As the Soviet Union shakes off Stalinism, it is still haunted by his uneasy ghost.